At the new Plainfield Bacchus Emergency Care Center, we're opening new doors to better health. More than just a 24/7 emergency room, the new center provides services you and your family need to get better, stay healthy, and be well. Choose wisely. Choose Bacchus.
Thank you for being so cooperative and getting back in your seats so we continue the program. So in the second half, we have candidates for the, help me out with the district here,
18th.
the 18th Senate District. But I did write down the towns, which I believe, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, Plainfield, Sterling, Griswold, Voluntown, Preston, North Stonington, Stonington, and Groton.
All
right, I got that.
He did say Griswold. Okay.
So we're going to start out again as we did with the House candidates with 90-second opening statements, and we'll begin with our challenger, Teresa Madonna.
Thank you, Paul, and special thanks to the New London Day for hosting this forum. My name is Teresa Madonna, and I'm running for State Senate because I truly believe that wishing for something does not make it true. And I've been wishing for quite a long time for several things that our state would do. I've been wishing that we would no longer have one-party rule in Hartford. I've been wishing that we could have a better tax structure to encourage more businesses to come to Connecticut, and so that we can be more employer-friendly. I've been wishing that our state would stop spending. In this tough economy, we just can't spend the kind of money we're spending. And I've been wishing that the lives of our nieces, nephews, I don't have children, but your children and grandchildren would be better than ours. And wishing doesn't make it so. And so I'm running for State Senate because my priorities are taxes, debt, spending, education, and eliminating one-party rule in Hartford. And thank you for allowing me to make opening remarks. And I reserve any time I have for later.
And Senator Maynard.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to the Day and to Groton Public Library for hosting this event. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll give a brief background for myself. I was born here in Groton, in the Noank section of Groton, where a lot of great political leaders have come out of. And I can't count myself among them, but I can say that I knew of several and know several now. I was raised there, the youngest of 8 children. I served in local government in Stonington as the warden of the borough, a small but demanding community, which trained me well for going to Hartford. I spent 10 years on the Council of Governments in southeastern Connecticut working on regional issues, served for 4 years on the executive committee of that, and then decided that many of the issues that really challenge us here at the local level come from Hartford as well as Washington. And I wanted to try to put my shoulder to the wheel to try to correct some of those. I think I've been an effective advocate for the district. I've served now for 6 years, 3 terms. I'm the Deputy Majority Leader, one of 4 Deputy Majority Leaders in the State Senate. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I chair the Transportation Committee. I hold 2 chairmanships as subcommittee chairs on the Appropriations Committee in Education and Higher Education, and I serve as Vice Chairman of the Environment Committee. I say that all to say that those are the issues I focused on, I think are important to the state, for our economy, for our economic future, and for the protection of our environment in Long Island Sound. So I look forward to the opportunity to discuss the issues further tonight, and hopefully to be returned for another term as your state senator. Thanks very much.
Okay, let's get to some questions, and some of these I know came up in the first part of our forum, but they're certainly all important issues. And on the question of Pfizer, I did receive several questions from the audience. I think it's important for our candidates for Senate to address it as well. And the gist of it being the great concern here about the future of Groton as a part of, of Pfizer as part of the Groton community. And what role, if any, do you see for the state legislature to try to keep Pfizer here and hopefully growing again? And the first question goes to Teresa Madonna.
Thank you. I think one of the key reasons that Pfizer left Groton was mentioned earlier today, and that is because they could not attract researchers to the state of Connecticut. They could not attract good employees to the state of Connecticut. And why is that? I believe one of the main reasons is because it cost a lot of money to live here. We have significantly a high cost of living in the state of Connecticut. We are one of the highest. We have a high tax rate and a high tax burden placed on individual taxpayers. So I think the issues go far beyond the fact that Pfizer needed corporate tax breaks in order to stay here. I think they go to Pfizer's ability to attract talent to the area. My other thought was that it is also a very expensive state to do business in. For those of you who don't know, Connecticut has had to borrow to fund their unemployment compensation fund. And that borrowing will result in increased costs to the individual businesses. I own a small business, it's just me. And imagine Pfizer as well, in a couple years when my FUTA, the federal unemployment tax, will have to be raised in order to pay back the money the state has borrowed to fund their bankrupt unemployment fund. So those are increased costs onto the businesses. The other increased cost to businesses is health insurance. It's very expensive in this state for employers to buy health insurance. You can go down south, you can go to other states, and the health insurance market is a lot less costly to employers. So I don't think it's just because they didn't get tax incentives on their buildings. I think it's the general cost to businesses and the high cost of living here in our state. And those can all be remedied, I think, at the legislative level.
All right, thank you. Senator Maynard.
Well, thank you, Paul. This is an issue that's obviously been very close to my mind, along with many of the other members of our delegation from southeastern Connecticut. I can tell you one thing, Pfizer is a global economic concern. It's a gigantic corporate entity, and it has made a decision to spin off Discovery to a new model. It's common in the industry now. They make partnerships with research universities, and it's the chief reason that we are losing the 1,100 people out of the Groton research facility. It's regrettable. It's something I think that has been touched on by some of our other candidates tonight, that had certain things fallen in a different order, we might have been able to staunch that outflow. But in fact, the head of neuroscience down there is a personal friend and neighbor of mine, and I've spoken at length with him and his wife about what policy different policy decisions we could have made and can make now to ensure that we keep Pfizer here. I can tell you what I've been doing. Along with other members of the delegation, we've met with the governor's chief of staff. I've brought 2 delegations of business officials from this area to meet with them. We've had meetings with Catherine Smith of DECD. We've had the Chamber of Commerce's effort. We've had a number of local initiatives. We've done an awful lot to try to meet with Pfizer officials themselves. They have been somewhat reluctant to get into that discussion at this stage, but we continue to press for that. I know the governor and Catherine Smith at DECD are both working very diligently to try to maintain the presence that they have. But these are some of the things, a lot of folks say that business always does things in a fast, swift, and efficient manner. Well, I can tell you, Pfizer's doing that right now, and none of us like it. So you can't always rely on business to make the right decision for a community. But there's an awful lot of people, I think, that we'll hear from and during the political season who will always raise laurels at the feet of business. Well, this is the side of business that is very unpleasant when we have to deal with it on a level that's larger. I think we put too many eggs in one basket. We did it a number of years ago in the defense industry. We may have done it again with our pharmaceutical industry, and I think this is an opportunity we now have, while trying to keep Pfizer here, to actually capitalize on the very, very good talent. I'll disagree with my opponent here. There's the best talent in the world, and research has come here, despite the cost of living, because they are the best, and Pfizer represents the best. But a lot of them are spinning off, and I think we can do a lot more to help them find a home here outside of the Pfizer community for those who have left.
And Ms. Madonna, I give you a default because Senator May took a little more time there. In response to his comments.
Thank you. Yes, just To reiterate my point, if Pfizer, and Pfizer is a globally competitive company, so they can move anywhere in the world where they can do business in a more efficient way and attract better talent. So why can't, I ask you, why can't Connecticut compete with that? Why can't we compete globally in attracting businesses? We have them and then they leave. It's more than just tax incentives, tax breaks, and meeting with people. It's about changing tax policy. It's about changing the business climate in Connecticut so we become employer friendly. And that's the nature of what has to change here in Connecticut.
Okay, this next question goes to Senator Maynard, and it's from a member of our audience, and they ask, what specifically can you do to help Connecticut reduce the tax burden on its citizens?
What can we do to reduce the tax burden? Well, one of the biggest things that we need to do is recover from this recession. The difficult part of that is it's global in scope. You know, it was touched on earlier this evening, but when after 2008, we had a fall off in revenue of some 20%. I mean, out of the blue, like a gut punch, we were missing about 1/5 of our budget. What we have done is make the largest cuts to the state budget in the state's history, along with, regrettably, the largest simultaneous tax increases to fill a $3.5 or $6 billion hole that was suddenly thrust upon us. I think the biggest thing we can do, and I don't disagree with my opponent on this issue, we have to make Connecticut a more business-friendly state. Revenues will increase, and the tax burden will be spread among a growing economic tide, rather than, as it has been in an emergency situation, dispersed as shared sacrifice and pain among an ebb tide. So I fully subscribe to the same notion. There's a number of things, and we'll get into them later, that I've done that were out of step with my party in not imposing new burdens on businesses, new mandates like the mandatory paid sick leave. I happen to disagree with that, and I voted against it. I don't disagree with those for their own reasons who supported it, but I think those are the kinds of things. Business needs to have a predictable, balanced and fair tax level, and they have to be able to understand what's coming next. And we have had a policy in the state, unfortunately, over many years, Democrat and Republican governors and legislatures alike, where we haven't provided clear, unambiguous direction about what our state tax policy is. So I guess the short answer is I would work to improve the business climate to increase revenues in the state naturally and provide the revenue that we need.
And Mrs. Madonna, again, the question is, what specifically will you do to help Connecticut reduce the tax burden on its citizens?
I have a really simple answer. It's 3 words: stop the spending. I mean, if we stopped the spending at the state level, we would be able to stop the taxing. And essentially, since 1970, the state population has grown 18%. Since 1970, our state spending has increased over 300%. If we stop the spending, we'll be able to decrease the tax burden on everybody. And the way Connecticut gets money to spend is through tax increases and borrowing. We have the highest per capita borrowing in the nation. For every resident of the state of Connecticut, the state owes $46,000. It's just so overwhelming I can't say it. For every resident in the state of Connecticut, the state owes $46,000 in debt that they've borrowed. So between the borrowing and the taxing, if we reduce the spending and spend wisely, I'm not saying don't have social programs, I'm not saying don't pay to educate our kids, just reallocate and spend wisely, we'd be able to reduce the tax burden on our employers, on our residents, and especially on the middle class who's getting squeezed the most.
All right, thank you. And kind of follow up to that question, and the next question goes to Ms. Madonna, and that would be any specifics on where you would cut. Are there any programs or policies where you specifically would change the business of the state?
I would like to see us reduce the gas tax, and I would like to see us do an analysis of, you know, right now the gas tax, I believe, is at 25 cents a gallon, not including the tax that the wholesalers pay. So I would like to see us reduce the gas tax. I would like to see us cut back on the 77 new taxes and fees that my opponent and the governor put into effect last year. Last year, in the 2011 legislative session, there were 77 new taxes and fees imposed. I would like to see us roll that back and think how we can do a better job. So I would like to repeal the 77 taxes and fees. I would like to repeal that legislation. I would like to see us cut the gas tax. And the other thing I would like to see is I would like to see us cut some of the taxes to small businesses. I am an attorney. I opened my law practice as a solo practitioner about 5 years ago, and I started my business in December. In December, I paid my $250 business entity tax, and I thought I was set for a year. But in January, I got another bill for $250 because it's every calendar year. So now I've spent $500 and I don't even have a client in the door. And I pay a $450 occupational tax because I'm an attorney. I mean, our business taxes on our small employers have to change. So those are some examples.
And, you know, Senator Maynard, you know, if you could address this, you know, perception and criticism that Connecticut simply spends too much and there must be lots of waste. And so if you could address that issue and, you know, what you've done to control the spending you think needs to be controlled.
Well, I would agree. I think we do spend too much. I think we spend too much because we have 4 of the poorest cities in the country. We have the poorest state capital in the whole United States. We have a lot of people that have been left in economic deserts with very, very challenging circumstances, and it's one of the chief struggles we have. But you know, the 5 biggest things we spend money on: health care for the elderly, biggest single most, and housing for the elderly, education. Personal, I think the third is employee services, the 4th or 5th is debt service, and the 5th or 4th is health care for our state employees and pensioners. You do that, you've got about, I think that's about 80% of the state budget, the first 5 line items. So there's not a lot of discretionary spending when you get down below that. I mean, there's a lot of programs that we could nibble away at, but the problem is people think you can come into the state budget with a meat axe and just hack away. The reality is it's marbled into the beef like a really good steak. The fat exists in every little tendril of government programs. It's one of the reasons why the longer I'm there, the less I believe in a new programming. And I spend most of my time trying to beat back new ideas. We have a tendency at the legislature to think that the only thing we can do to prove ourselves is to come up with new legislation. I would rather spend a significant amount of time rolling back that. We have a very unsatisfactory sunset law, and we've done some efforts to try to roll that back. But you know, we do spend too much. I don't disagree with that, and it's one of the things that I worked hard on even in the last tax package. I'll tell you 2 taxes we don't have, thanks to me, Senator Stillman, and a number of very committed people in the shoreline area. We don't have a new tax on boats and aircraft and maintenance, which were proposed. And I'll tell you why we fought so hard for that. It's not to relieve the property or the tax burden on boat owners per se. It's to sustain an industry that is already under threat. If you go 10 minutes up the road and you have a non-taxed circumstance in Rhode Island for almost everything related to boating. The same thing with airplanes. If you start taxing those, we just passed the Connecticut Airport Authority bill to try to generate new commerce at our 5 general aviation airports. And right on the cusp of that, we were going to tell everybody that where they were servicing their plane, where they were fueling up, where they were getting anything done to it or storing it, they were going to be taxed to the hilt. They can fly it over the border to Rhode Island or Massachusetts or New York. So, you know, you have to be thoughtful in these tax things. It's very, very complex state policy. And what I try to do is benchmark us against neighboring states. How do we compare? Just quickly, and I'll conclude with this. You know, people like to talk about how bad the tax burden is here. Well, it is high, but Rhode Island has a 5.99, so a 6% tax rate. Our current top rate is 6.7. Maine is 8.5%. Vermont is 8.95. New York is 8.82 with a surtax on millionaires. New Jersey is 8.97. New Hampshire, as we know, has no state income tax. But Massachusetts has 5.3, but they have a 12% capital gains tax. So Connecticut actually stacks up very, very favorably, and we've been very thoughtful and conscious about this as we looked into increases in the tax rate. It's all well and good to say cut taxes and cut spending. I believe in that too, but the reality is these are very complex measures, and you have to look around and see what your neighboring states are doing, what your competitor states are doing, and then try to make thoughtful decisions.
All right, Ms. Madonna, there's a lot there. Your turn. A couple of the major points that seem to be raised is you're a big proponent of education and human services, and the center saying, well, a lot of these things take up a big bulk of the spending, so where can you really find big cuts? And also his argument that comparatively our tax rates are not that bad. So your chance to respond.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. I disagree with my opponent that to be able to go, first of all, I agree with my opponent that you don't go in, you don't take a meat axe to just cutting programs. However, there are programs that we could run more efficiently. For example, I spent 8 years on the Board of Education in Griswold. I've spent 15 years in higher education administration. I was the academic vice president of 2 colleges and universities in the area. And so I understand education, K through 14, K through 18. I understand education. For example, a program that could be run more efficiently is in the state of Connecticut, we have a minimum funding requirement for municipalities in education, which means if a state or if a municipality funds their educational system less than they did last year, they get in essence penalized 2 for 1. So if the city of Groton or the town of Griswold came forward with an educational budget that was more efficient, okay, so that they did things more efficiently, not that they cut back programs, but maybe they got savings on health insurance, maybe they got savings by partnering with other towns on the purchase of fuel and utilities. So if they come forward with truly a more efficient budget, and it's $100,000 less than it was the year before, their educational cost sharing gets cut $200,000. So we are in essence penalizing municipalities for finding efficiencies. That's not taking a hatchet to education. That's leaving the educational system intact and rewarding those who are more efficient and not penalizing them. So we can use the same kind of common sense approach and analysis to all the large programs that we fund and just make sure that they're as efficient as possible.
All right, thank you. Because the next question is going to go to Senator Maynard, and we're kind of talking about the macro issues, and I got a micro question. And it's from the library here, and I thought it only fair to bring it up tonight. We've had the chance. I can't vouch for this, but I'm sure it's right since a librarian gave it to me. It says Connecticut ranks 36 in state support for libraries. Only 58 cents per capita compared to $2.94 per capita nationally. And this librarian points out that ICON, the online database, if properly funded, can be a great resource for job creation. So the question was, any thoughts on library funding, increasing library funding at the state level? Senator Maynard.
I'd be happy to answer that one. I'm going to do the one thing I rarely do, but I'm going to toot my own horn. I'm the chairman of the committee that has oversight over the state library funding, as well known here. I have a great rapport with most of our local librarians, and I saved that program along with my colleague Andrew. I was going to say Rohrback, Andrew Fleischman. Thank you. I'm looking at the co-chair of the Education Committee as I'm saying that. Andrew Fleischman, my co-chair on that. The two of us agreed wholeheartedly and absolutely countermanded the recommendation for cutting of that program dramatically. We know that. In fact, we go through a process every budget cycle, and we're just about to begin it again, where we meet with the state librarian, and we go over what their recommendations are for cuts, and we look at what their budget is, and they unfailingly give us the best, most efficient, most thoughtful report. They make the best use of every penny. I can't argue with her a bit. We're going to try to get more money in at this session. In a budgetary year where we're in deficit, it's hard to put money back. That's the one place we didn't make a single additional cut this year because of the strength of the presentation we had from the state librarian. So all I can say is I can't promise we'll get more money back in there, but it'll be my effort to do that. We get more bang for the buck. And it's one of the great places that where we are seeing cuts for children's programs in schools, and there are challenges in local budgets, and where unfortunately local municipalities aren't able to make the same kinds of contributions to the library, that we should be filling in the gap there, and I hope to do that.
And Mrs. Madonna, the question.
Thank you for the question, because in my employment in colleges and universities, they struggle with the same issue, how to keep up the highest caliber library for the education of their students. In the municipalities, on my years on the Board of Education and also on my years on the Board of Selectmen, we struggle with the same issue. More people in the community use our libraries than ever before. So we have an obligation to make sure that the libraries are funded when we need them. However, currently, what I would think about doing is currently our libraries are like silos. Okay, so we have the libraries in the technical schools, we have the libraries in K through 8, we have the libraries in high schools, we have the libraries in college. Let's talk about collaboration with libraries amongst each other to build a better network of library system and access. I would like to examine that as a way to increase efficiencies, to make sure everyone has access to the services that they need. The databases and online databases that are required in colleges and universities can definitely help people who walk into public libraries. The databases public libraries have can help the community colleges and the high schools and the technical schools. So let's collaborate resources amongst libraries in a way that makes everyone appear to be fully funded, but yet what we're doing is sharing the resources that we have. So I think libraries are a vital part of our communities. I belong to a book club. We meet at the library. And none of us in Griswold can afford a book a month, so our library borrows them from the rest of the state, and so none of us have to buy them. I mean, so we need to find creative ways to provide the services that the libraries need.
All right, next question goes to Teresa Madonna, and it comes from a frustrated doctor who came up to see me, and he asked, what are your plans to prevent the loss of more doctors in Connecticut due to malpractice issues? And I guess that refers to the spiraling insurance costs of malpractice. And it's Teresa Madonna.
I think the answer comes in tort reform, and I think that's an answer that the legislature can comment on, but tort reform is not necessarily going to be a political issue. I think the more important issue in healthcare is how do we as a state encourage the education of general practitioners who provide the grassroots level of medicine that we need? And I think we can do that. I think we can promote the sciences at a very early age in our local schools. I mean, science is not cool these days. I mean, what do we do as a state, and especially in the 18th district, to promote science and technology in our high schools? That's going to encourage more people to go into medicine. And then we have to then encourage doctors to go into the general practice, because that's where most of the patients need assistance. I think the answer in terms of the direct answer is of the question that was asked lies in tort reform, and that's well beyond, I think, the scope of political life. I think the best we can do is focus on access and cost, which are the two key issues in healthcare. And education of our students to promote more doctors.
And Senator Maynard, this doctor's concerned about the loss of doctors in Connecticut, and in particular due to malpractice costs.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly with my opponent on that. There are 14 members of the Connecticut State Senate who are attorneys, 15 if my opponent is elected. We've had a hard time moving the issue of tort reform through the legislature, but it's one of those things that is a political football. I'm sorry, that was a cheap joke.
It's okay. I'm an advocate of tort reform. Okay.
That was just a cheap joke. My brother's an attorney, but my niece is a doctor, so there you go. We have all of these debates at our house all the time. And my niece is an OBGYN. She'll never practice in the state of Connecticut because, regrettably, we have an attitude, and I apologies to Matt and others in the audience, we have an attitude among some members of the public that for every unfortunate outcome, a cash settlement is in order. And unfortunately, as my niece has explained to me, you know, you have thousands of pregnancies and births a year. Sometimes things happen, but it's very difficult. I mean, and obviously we don't have willy-nilly laws about who can be sued, and you have to make your case, and there's always the issues of negligence and whatnot. But there is a tendency to have to protect ourselves against any unfortunate outcome because people have come to expect when you can present a very heart-wrenching story before a jury that there is going to be a large cash settlement associated with it, and it makes for a very bad setup. I think the insurance companies need to have a seat at the table as well. I haven't seen clear evidence that there's dramatic reductions in rates in states that have enacted tort reform. I'm certainly open to exploring it further. I think it's something that, unfortunately, we just kick around like an old shoe, year in and year out. But I think just reiterating our doctor versus lawyer argument really isn't going to get us very far, and the insurance companies definitely have to pitch in on a rate.
Our next question goes to...
Can I comment on the lawyer thing?
Brief, yeah.
Fine.
I'll make it brief.
Okay.
Just to clarify the lawyer thing, okay, that my opponent put on the table. I get at least 2 calls a week to ask me if I practice medical malpractice, and the answer is always the same: no. Okay, I'm a bankruptcy attorney. I'm a foreclosure defense attorney. I help people keep their homes in this terrible economy. It's what I do. I don't represent businesses, and I don't do medical malpractice.
All right. Thank you for that clarification, Councilman. Senator Maynard, the big issue nationally here in Connecticut this election cycle is jobs. The Connecticut unemployment rate is staying persistently high. It seemed to be edging down, but now it's above 8. It seems to be staying there. What is the role of the legislature in trying to spur job creation and some economic growth here in Connecticut?
Yeah. Can I do one quick thing? One thing about the doctors. I think one important investment we made was the investment in the medical center at UConn. That was a tough call. It's a lot of money, but my niece is a graduate there. I've met many a time with their staff up there, and the facilities were antiquated. If you want to have a top-notch medical school with the ability to attract the best teachers and the best doctors, and hopefully have some of them stay here in the state of Connecticut, that's one way to do it, and I think we did do that. On the job side, related to that, I think the investments we're making, people like to say we ought to run government more like a business, and I think they always mean cut. Well, you know what else businesses do? They invest. And some of the things we have to do in this state are invest in infrastructure. I happen to be chairman of the Transportation Committee only 2 years in, and I can tell you already we are so far underwater with our 50-year-old infrastructure. Built about the time, I just celebrated my 50th birthday, and I think it was much of it built about the time I was born or crawling around on the floor. And so, we have 2,500 bridges that don't have enough, that are inadequate. We have highways that are overburdened. We have a transit system that we're making huge investments in, but have to make more investments in. The point being, you have to, if you expect to attract jobs and create a vibrant economy, you do have to invest. And we're doing that in a whole host of areas. A whole new set of M8 cars, thanks to Governor Rell's initiative with support from the legislature. The Governor Malloy now putting enormous investment into our airports and ports and highway system. That's essential to move goods, to move people, and to continue to be able to be an attractive place for tourism. We have to make those kinds of investments. Broadly speaking, I still think that we have a very complex regulatory system here that I have been working all my 6 years in the legislature to try to beat back. You need a machete and a native guide to get through half of the bureaucracy that the state throws at small business owners. My sister, I'll finish with this, was a small business owner. She opened the first bakery in Noang about 20 years ago. The first person she heard from, and I'm sure this will resonate with anybody who's opened a small business, was the Department of Revenue Services. Probably within 24 or 48 hours, you got a notice from them. Welcome. It was like the greetings card when you got drafted. And you do have to pay that business entity tax. The one defense I'll make of the business entity tax, even though I hate the darn thing, and it ought to be, if not eliminated, done on a graduated level with a very small fee for small businesses up to a bigger fee for large established businesses. But the reality is, for small business owners, the business entity tax is not just a blind tax, it's your incorporation, it's the LLC. It gives you protection for your assets, you're incorporating. So, you know, you do pay that fee every year, but it is not as if it's for nothing. You're paying a fee like I do as a realtor, as you do as a doctor in other areas, as other professionals do. You pay these fees because they're part of your professional enterprise, but it's not for nothing. I guess I'd say there's a lot more we can talk about, but investing in infrastructure, investing in the education of our students at both the high school and higher ed level, I think we're making huge gains on that score, particularly in the higher ed department, and cutting the regulatory excesses that strangle business and scare people away from wanting to do business here.
And Mrs. Madonna, your idea is job creation.
Well, I'd like to comment on a couple points that my opponent made. The first is, when you incorporate and when you form an LLC, you pay a fee when you send in your original paperwork. And that should be the fee that covers filing the paperwork. And now your annual reports are all submitted online. So to me, I see no basis for the business entity tax, first of all. Second of all, and I do think it creates an unfair burden on small businesses when they first start up. So secondly, I think I agree with my opponent, again, that the infrastructure is an impediment to business development in the state of Connecticut, the transportation infrastructure. And my opponent, who so readily offered up that he is the chair of the Transportation Committee, voted to spend approximately $600 million on a project which increased the infrastructure between New Britain and Hartford. It does nothing for the 18th district. The busway between New Britain and Hartford, while it supposedly helps traffic in that part of the state, it does nothing for the 18th district. And if we're going to promote tourism in the 18th district, how does one get to Mystic? Okay? If you don't drive there, Mystic attracts 60% of the tourists to the 18th district. If you don't drive there and you try to take a train there, my understanding is you have to take a train into New London, and then you have to get a bus which brings you to Mystic Village. And if you want to go to Mystic Seaport, you have to walk from Mystic Village to Mystic Seaport, which is about a mile because I did it. Or you can go to the flagpole in downtown Mystic. So we don't have a transportation infrastructure in the 18th district that promotes the tourism that we have. We have a fabulous Connecticut wine trail, and many of those are in the 18th district. We don't have any public transportation that will get you there. So while the busway between New Britain and Hartford is interesting and costs the state about $600 million, some of it's bonded, some of it's federal money, some of it's state money, borrowing once again, it does nothing for the 18th district. So to promote jobs, especially in the area of tourism in this state, we need better transportation, we need less red tape for new business development, and I would like to see some loans, not grants, not giveaway money like we did to Jackson Labs, $300 million to create 300 jobs. That's $1 million a job the last time I did the math. I would like to see grants to businesses in the area to promote small business development that centers around tourism, that attracts people to the 18th district. And then I'd like to see some infrastructure money coming here. In the 18th district alone, we have 19 bridges that are structurally deficient or obsolete. And I would like to see some money coming to help with our own infrastructure and to promote jobs in the area. Thank you.
And if you wanted to respond, Senator Maynard, a couple of points were raised. Your support of the New Britain-Hartford busway,
Yeah.
and lack of support, arguably, according to your opponent, for something transporting people around here.
Yeah, well, let me speak to the New Britain busway. It's I think all but one other member of the Senate, Republicans and Democrats alike, voted for that bill, and it wasn't a standalone bill. It was our massive, comprehensive, catch-all transportation bill. Regrettably, these things come along. They take years, sometimes decades, to come to fruition. In the New Britain busway instance, it was proposed, I think, 14 or 15 years ago. It went through an enormous, long planning, environmental analysis, review process, went through the feds, went all the way through. Congressman Larson was a big proponent of it up in Hartford. It had almost unanimous support in both the House and Senate as part of a broader package. The difficulty is on transportation issues, you get the whole thing. I can tell you this, I've only been the chairman for 2 years, but and I wasn't chair when that was put through. I was a voting member, and I did support it, because we also that year got significant new investment in Shoreline East. We got a lot of good funding for rail throughout the state. We got some parking garages in various urban areas that utilize rail. These are the things you have to do. You have to build an infrastructure in order to support a rail system. The New Britain Railway is easy to lampoon because, busway is easy to lampoon. I'm not a big supporter of it, frankly, but it's been decided. What really cut it for me was that 15 years into the project, with $122 million already expended on planning, and it's not just 8 miles of road, it's 11 or 14 different bus stations with circuits of downtown transit that bring people into a unified busway to connect New Britain, the 8 outlying communities or 10 outlying communities, and the downtown into the rail station, which will build on another initiative that'll take rail out to Bradley Airport and interconnect with the high-speed loop from Springfield to New Haven. So it starts making more sense as part of a broad, comprehensive plan. It's still not my favorite because I don't think people really like to ride buses as much as they, maybe should or would in other localities. But that's what was funded. If we canceled that program this year, the state would have been on the hook to reimburse all $122 million. We couldn't repurpose the money. It was going to be pulled out of the state. We would get nothing for it, and we'd owe the feds $122 million. So I reluctantly, having had to debate it for 6 hours on the floor with Senator Markley, explained that it was just not a good idea to send the money back, because the other thing you get is a big black mark next to your name in Connecticut for the next time you want a significant rail or airport or roadway project, because we thumbed our nose at them. It's all fun for political gain to do that sort of stuff. Not here, I'm saying, up at the legislature, to make fun of these programs. But they take a long time to get through, and this one was already under contract, in fact, to 14 separate contractors and subcontractors. We were absolutely required to go forward with this. So, and I think, frankly, it'll be a lot better than its detractors think it will be when it's over with. About getting money up here, I've worked very, very hard to, along with every member of this delegation. I have to say, I've got a lot of them here tonight, we got a lot of members of this delegation that work very closely together as a team to deliver funding for this state, whether it's Three Rivers, whether it's the $50 million for the subbase, whether it's transit, whether it's the seaport or tourism funding or whatever it might be, whether it's the senior center up in Griswold we were able to get some money for, or UCFS, or the hospice center. We work as a team. Democrats and Republicans, although there's significantly more Democrats at the moment than Republicans on that delegation. And that's how it is. We share the credit, we take the blame, but we do our best to deliver for our district.
Yeah, so, moving on, unless there's, I don't know if there's another point you want to make on that.
Yeah, there is, sure.
Yeah, if you could just.
It'll be quick.
Okay, thank you.
It'll be quick. I'm sorry. The only other point about the busway is that I did read all 119 pages of your transcript between you and Senator Markley, and it was interesting to me that the busway bill, the bill that passed in 2006 was a roadmap for infrastructure in Connecticut, and it's viewed as a strategic planning bill, not necessarily a vote for the busway. And in 2006, the project would have cost $300 million.
Right.
Now it costs $600 million. So there comes a point in time where you say, what I wanted to do in 2006, I can't afford to do now.
Right. I should point out, if I could just say, some 85 or 90% of the funding is federal. So almost all of the $600 million is the federal take. We have about a
$112 million bond.
yeah, about 100. I was going to say about 112.
We had a question. I guess the next question goes to Teresa Madonna, and looking at the violence, you know, we see on the nightly news with the shooting of youth in our community, convenience store shootings. Do you see any role for the legislature to try to reduce that, and are our gun controls sufficient? Is the question.
I think one of the key things we need to do immediately is, and it goes to the gun issue and it goes to the recidivism issue, is immediately suspend the earned credit program that was put into place by the Malloy administration. I mean, we are, the last data suggested that I read that 7,000 people had been released from prison under this earned credit, and 700 of them have been rearrested as returning criminals. There's an example in Meriden where a person named Frankie Resto was let out several months early, and immediately 3 months after his release went and shot and killed a convenience store owner, and he's back in prison. And one of the reasons we have violent criminals is because we don't do enough, in my opinion, to prepare people getting out of the prison system to have a fruitful and productive life. I do believe we have sufficient gun regulation. I would not advocate or promote additional gun regulation. I am a member of the NRA. I do have a rifle and a handgun that I'm licensed to carry. I do target shooting, which I enjoy immensely. And I do believe we have enough gun regulation. What we don't have is enough programs or enough education about gun control. I would like to see more education about gun control within our educational system. I would like to see more education about gun control in our community. I would like to see our young people have more to do so that they don't turn to gun and violence.
And Senator Maynard, again, the question was the concerns about the amount of youth violence, particularly involving guns in our urban centers, and your opponent also raised the issue of the early release programs.
Yeah, I don't think we need additional gun legislation. I agree with Teresa on that. I was until recently a member of the Groton Sportsman's Club. I forgot to pay my dues, and now I'm having to go on the waiting list again, but I've got a 100% rating from the NRA. Because I do believe that, you know, responsible gun owners shouldn't be penalized because of the sort of general fear in the populace. I think when we see a lot of the exaggerated gun violence throughout the country, the extreme incidents in the theater out in Aurora and other places in New York on the streets and so forth, there's so many times I think it has to do with our failure on mental health policy, frankly. I think we've got a lot of people that are on the edge of you know, mental health and are being untreated or getting under the radar screen if they are being treated, and the threats and the risks associated with that. And it's a very complex area, but I mean, every time we've had one of these real violent acts with multiple victims, it tends to be someone who's slipped through the cracks or has not received adequate mental health care, and that's I think the root of that particular problem. I know a lot of people want to go to the guns, but I think it might be more the other side of that particular issue. There was another.
And the, you know, the early release program, giving inmates the opportunity to earn credit.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this whole prison reform policy is an enormously challenging area, and there's a new secretary there, Mike Lawler, former chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House, has been appointed, and he's taking on a very, very challenging area of public policy. It's extremely costly to run a lot of prisons. One of the things that we've discovered is that Connecticut has one of the longest look-back periods for parole violations. It's one of the reasons we have so many people who are recidivists. You have to have it's 5 years. Mm-hmm. You're talking about guys that get in trouble when they're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and they're on a parole program or a probationary program, or if they have a violation of any kind, in 5 years, they're back in the slammer. They're back through the court system. It's costing us a lot of money. So we've been trying to make, and the other thing is you turn young, errant individuals into hardened criminals if they spend that much time continuously in the judicial system, behind bars, or learning the ropes of how to get off and how to bargain and how to do all the things that I've seen day in and day out at courthouses around the district and around the state. We put a lot of effort into trying to come up with a sensible policy that doesn't just make a revolving door for these young people coming out, and one of them was this proposal. I might point out that there were exemptions. I'll tell you something, it was not as advertised entirely when the bill came through. There were things in there that allow, and I tell you, we get an awful lot of legislation that comes through like a fire hose in the final days of session, and you do your best effort, but you end up relying on the people that know it best, the chairs of the Judiciary Committee, the secretaries of it. We ask them very pointed questions. We caucus every single bill that comes through in the Senate because we have a small enough caucus that we can talk about every bill before it goes on the floor. But details sometimes come out in the wording with the legislative commissioner's office and so forth, and you find out you voted for something that allows a horrible exception for somebody that was, you thought, classified in a different level. So I regret that. We're going to have to go back and look at taking some of that out. But the other thing is, it's not automatic. Just because you earn time doesn't mean they're required to give it to you. It goes before a review board. These people have to make an assessment, so it's not automatic. It's not just like you crank it up and you check it off on the box and you're in or out, as the case may be. So I think we built in a lot of protections. We clearly, it's new legislation. We're finding that there were some refinements definitely needed, and you know, I pray God nobody, you know, commits a crime that affects family in the interim before we have a chance to get back and do some revision on that.
Anything more on that after hearing your opponents? That hour is flown by. And we had some long answers, but I think we had some very in-depth answers, which I appreciate. I have one more question, and I believe it's Teresa Madonna's turn, and you can sort of incorporate, I think, this question into your kind of final statement to try to, and when you hear it, I think
a twofer.
If elected, what would be your top priority legislatively? And I'll give you a little extra time because you can also kind of add your final remarks.
Thank you. First of all, I want to stress how important it is that we elect good Republicans to the Senate. Right now in Hartford, we have what essentially amounts to one-party rule. The Democrats, as much as I love Democrats, and I have some best friends who are Democrats, the Democrats control both the House and the Senate. And what it does is it stifles creative thinking. And in Connecticut right now, if we were to elect 5 Republican senators, the Republicans would have a majority in the Senate. That will bring back to Hartford the critical thinking, the good discussion, the amount of argument that is healthy. And I think we need to do that. And so I think that's why it's important to look at the Republican folks who are running for Senate in each of the districts. So my priority first is to get elected, and with 4 other of my colleagues in the state, to restore a balance to our government in Hartford. And then once I'm elected, obviously, one of my priorities is to look at state spending and look at what we can do to become more efficient. I can't run my household today like I ran it 5 years ago or 8 years ago. The economy just won't let me do that. And so if I'm going to have a healthy household and be able to pay my bills, I have to take some temporary shortcuts. I have to cut back in my household to make it work. So I would look at spending in much the same light. I would look at what our state is doing to become indebted for future generations. We are on the peak of a financial cliff in Connecticut, and we have to stop the spending. We just have to. Another priority for me would be to try and give some tax relief, especially to new business startups and especially to the middle class. And lastly, to cut down on some of the red tape, as my colleague said, that prevents new business development and that prevents employers from coming to the state. So in essence, I'm looking at job creation, taxes, spending. Those are my priorities if I'm elected. And as my closing remark, I started out by standing in front of you saying you can't wish for something and it automatically happens. Wishing for something doesn't make it happen. But I do believe that we need to send people to Hartford like myself, because you can never grow a wishbone where your backbone should be. And we need to send people there that are educated. And if you want to know how educated I am, look at my website. My resume is 8 pages long. I have 3 master's degrees and a doctorate, but that's besides the point, and a law degree. We need to send people who are educated.
If you could kind of sum up, to be fair.
I am.
Okay.
Experienced and care about their communities. That's why I'm the right person for this job. Thank you.
I've tried to bring that up there. I've tried to bring a southeastern Connecticut perspective to Hartford. I think along with my colleagues in the delegation, we've done a very good job of having our voice heard. With the new governor, even though it may be of the same party, I think we've seen more responsiveness, more visits, and more of a presence of this governor than we saw in the previous 2 administrations, at least in terms of southeastern Connecticut. So there's an upside as well to having a shared executive and legislative branch. I agree with you. There's the times when more Republicans or more of an opposition voice, regardless of which side it is, gets to a better product earlier in the process, because you end up ultimately having to compromise on some level and find common ground. I find that I do a pretty good job of that. I hate to admit it, but the very person who probably recruited you for the Senate is one of my very best friends up there, and he's going to hear about it. John McKinney, the minority leader, is a very good friend, a very moderate Republican from southwestern part of the state. His father was one of the most distinguished members of Congress. I've had some of my best friends, as is said, are in the Republican caucus up there. I've worked closely with them. I've tried to instill a sense of the old kind of comity that existed in Washington in the old days. And Speaker Rayburn used to have a thing he called the Board of Education. At 5 o'clock, everyone went off to his office by invitation and shared perhaps a slight refreshment at the end of the business day. And the rule was no business. You got to know people. And I think that's the thing that's been missing both on our local state level and at the federal level. We don't get to know people across party lines as much anymore. And it's very difficult when you've been asking about a kid's soccer game and finding out how his wife's doing and what the new job is or whatever, to go out there and kick the hell out of him on the floor. And I find it very useful to get to know other people from across the aisle. I've made it my hallmark effort up there among colleagues to just try to extend that hand of friendship and understanding across the aisle. I think it's worked pretty well for me, and it's worked pretty well for this district, and I hope it'll be something that spreads up there. I have a fairly moderate voting record. I've parted company with my party many a time. I'd say, to answer your specific question, if going back next year, I think dealing with anything we can do to try to stimulate the economy here or provide a framework in which businesses want to invest more and hire more is the first order of business. If we can get the tax revenues flowing, and if we can have people earning a decent living and getting off unemployment and not imperiled of losing their house, that's the biggest thing we can do for our constituents and for the state. Beyond that, and I agree with Teresa, this will be
Why don't you end with I agree with Teresa?
All right. Is the debt crisis that she mentioned. Our pension and health care benefits is the biggest challenge we face as a state, and it's got to be one of the things we address first after getting the economy going, or concurrently with that. So that would be my two issues.
All right. Well, thank you very much. You have 2 fine candidates to choose from. I thank you for coming, and have a good night.